Welcome back to English with Kim. I'm Kim, and I'm your guide to the essential communication skills you need to sound more natural in English. Welcome to this live Q&A. Let's chat community check-in. As most of you know, this is a very unusual time here on the planet, and so we have some time to catch up with each other, check in, see how things are going. And so I decided this was a great time to start doing a few live videos in order to interact with you guys in real time. I'm so excited to be back in front of the camera, and if there's any trouble with it, please let me know. It's been quite a while since I've done a live video, and it's up to you guys to tell me if it's working okay. So as you come in and join the live chat, please be sure to say hello, introduce yourself. And as a reminder, I focus mostly on accent and communication skills here on my channel. So while I can answer some of your other English questions, I really want to focus on the types of videos that I talk about here on my channel. But in the meantime, I would love to check in with you guys. It has been quite a while. Those of you who have been a member of the channel, who have been part of the community for 2, 3, 4 years, you remember I used to go live more often. But things change and I started doing a lot more recorded videos. So it's interesting to be back having the live chat. So I always like to start these out by hearing about you guys, where you're from. And we're going to start with some conversation questions that are really good for these days, for what's going on right now, and for checking in with people without focusing on the negative, trying to find out how people are using this as an opportunity to continue working on things that are important to them. So as we get started, I would like to hear from you guys, and I'll be checking in with the chat in just a moment. So like I said, this is a welcome back, and let's get reacquainted. So introduce yourself in the chat. When we say that we're going to get reacquainted, it means it's been a while since we've had this opportunity to talk one-on-one. And so we're having a chance to kind of get comfortable with each other again, see where we're at, see how things are going. And that's just why I felt like using that word. And hopefully you learned a new word through this. And so I would love it if you would introduce yourself and tell me where you're watching from, how things are going, where you are. And the next question I'm going to ask you as I check in with the chat is, what have you been up to? When someone asks, what have you been up to? They want to know what's been happening recently, what's been happening in the last few days, the last few weeks. What have you been doing recently? And so I felt like that was a great question to start talking about with you guys here today. So let's see, how is everybody doing? Okay, good. Somebody told me it was perfect. Okay, so what have you been up to is the question that we will be talking about in the chat as we get started. All right, so let me take a look at the chat. Okay, so you can still see me. Here, I'll try to get more into the screen, and I apologize if I keep hitting the desk. It's hard to keep everything stable at the same time. At least the microphone is stable. So hello from Saudi Arabia. How's it going? And I answered, this is not my first time going live, but I think the last time I went live was last March as well. And can you ask some questions? Yes, go ahead and ask your questions, and I will come back to them. Hi, Etta Nilsson, I remember you. Let's get reacquainted. So I'll come back to these questions here in just a moment. Hi, Sundus. Okay. Hi, Luis from the Dominican Republic. Hi, Christina. Okay, more questions. Saeed, you have lots of questions. That's awesome. Hi, May. Hi, Mark Arthur. Joseph. I'm guessing your name might be Joseph. It's your very first time here. Hi, y'all. Hello. Hello there, Abdallah. Saeed again introducing himself. Hi, Kat, watching from Chicago, Illinois. Oh, that's right. I should probably tell you guys where I'm at. I'm in New England. So I'm in the United States right now, and I'm in New England, about an hour north of Boston. So it actually snowed yesterday, if you can believe it. It snowed yesterday. We had like 6 inches of snow. I guess that doesn't work if you use meters. But anyway, it was a lot of snow, and now it's melting. So I'm still waiting for spring. It's still waiting for spring to come here and see the flowers and everything blooming. Hello, Luis. It's your first time here from the Dominican Republic. It's probably the first time for a lot of people, since the last time I did this live stream was when I hit 10,000 subscribers. So there's about double that amount of people who are now part of the community. So I think it's awesome if you guys are new here. And of course, I do recognize some names of people who have been around for a while. So thank you for stopping in. Hi, Demi Kim. Hi, Sindus. I said hello. Francisco. And hello from London, UK. How are you doing over there? And you've been working on your own, waiting for the class to open. Yes, very good. And hello, Luis from Colombia. So let's go back to the question I asked you guys now that we've introduced ourselves, which is, what have you been up to? So what have you been up to in the past couple of days, the past couple of weeks, especially if it's been a while since we chatted personally? The next question I'm going to ask you so that we can kind of keep the conversation flowing is, what are you spending more time on? And most of you are probably experiencing the same thing that I am here, that perhaps your plans have shifted from what they initially were when you first we're thinking about what was going to happen in 2020, but there is some opportunities to do some other things. So what are you spending more time on? And the reason I'm asking this question is, my hope is that while we're still in this global crisis bringing us together, I'm hoping to go live more often, hopefully once a week, at least twice a month. So this will be an opportunity for us to connect a little bit more, because I'm going to change my plans just like you are. So I would love to hear what you've been up to recently, and what have you been working on more often these days? What was the question I asked? It was, what are you spending more time on? And so if we're talking about what are you spending more time on, you may have time for some of your hobbies. Maybe you're not spending as much time commuting. You may have a break from school or from work. So you may have the opportunity to work on something different. I've been working on some of my creative projects. I've been spending a lot less money going out and about because I'm not doing that anymore. So I'm able to focus on finishing projects that I've had going for a while. So, there's things that we can do in the home. And actually, one of the things I've been hearing from my students and my clients is that they're spending time focusing on their accent and communication skills because they have the opportunity to perhaps finish a course that they enrolled in, to meet with me for a consultation. Perhaps they're just revisiting information that they need to brush up on. So this is an opportunity to spend time doing things that you may not feel like you have time for when we're not inside a global crisis situation. Okay, so let me check it back in with the chat here now. Okay, so you've been working on your own, waiting for class to open, right? So sometimes we have to study on our own, and this is actually a great opportunity to be more resourceful. Something that I like thinking about a lot when we're talking about learning is, it's important to be able to follow other people's instructions. But in order to continue to grow, to continue to improve, to sound more natural in English, as you guys know I often talk about, you need to be able to kind of harness the power of the information you're given and then find ways to apply it yourself. So this is a great opportunity to start listening to a lot more English, to be able to tune your ear so that you can hear different things about English that you're not normally listening to. Listen to people speaking at normal speeds, kind of challenge yourself to listen to more difficult topics. So it's a real opportunity to find ways to expand your knowledge. Something I've been talking about a lot with my clients is that a lot of times people are really concerned about improving their accent and improving their speaking skills, having better conversations, communicating more effectively. But something we often forget that I like to remind you that I used to talk about here on the channel is that you need to have strong listening skills in order to have strong speaking skills. If you want to sound more intelligent, more articulate, more professional, you need to listen to professional English, be able to identify what strategies people are using and then use them yourself. So it is an opportunity to expand what you know through listening. You do have opportunities, to chat here on these live videos. I know a lot of other people are doing live videos now as well. So there are plenty of opportunities to practice that may not have been, going to your classroom and practicing or interacting with your friends, in person. You can now Skype with people, do these live lessons. There's a lot of opportunities to think differently, to think about how can we use our resources and channel them into something else. It's if you feel like being creative, it's a good opportunity to think creatively. All right, so let's go back to the chat here as well. Okay, so you guys are answering this. Okay, good. So it's snowing there just to make matters worse. Oh my gosh, yeah, right? It's like, do we not have enough trouble? But yeah, it's what happens here in New England is that it's allergy season, right? So, you start sniffling and coughing, and now you're like, am I having allergies or is it something else, And so maybe the snow is actually calming down this spring, but I was so excited on, I think it was Monday. of last week. I don't know. Sometime recently in the last few days, I was looking at my plants that were growing outside, and then next thing you know, there's snow on them, but they'll be fine. Okay. Louise says, I've been reading and watching series. Exactly. It's a good opportunity to catch up on all those TV series and, binge watch things that you've been meaning to watch. I need to find more series to watch. I don't really watch a lot of TV, but I have more time to do so now. Mark Arthur Joseph says, I'm spending time reading and trying to pick my English up. That's awesome. So you're trying to kind of take advantage of this and bring your English to the level that you want it to be. That's awesome. Yeah. Proper quarantine in London. We're not much. Yeah. You can't go out. Where I am, there is not a stay at home order yet, but I'm staying at home. So, it's just one of those things. You might as well keep your community safe, as it were. And Safe Henny says, I've been spending my time watching film series and making some revision of my studies. Exactly. You're reviewing stuff you already learned. That's actually a really good point that I'd like to bring up because you're smart and you brought that up. One of the things that I've been realizing as well, because I often have to go back and review things that I've already learned. And one of the ways that we cement the stuff that we understand in our brain is to review it. So even if you think you know something, it doesn't mean you don't ever need to review it. You don't learn it once and then you're done. You have the opportunity to review, to go back. And so sometimes when things are a little bit, I don't know, when you think things are too easy for you, that may be true. You may need to challenge yourself, but sometimes you have to go back and you find nuances or details or subtle differences that you didn't notice the first time through. So I find I've been feeling that way. You guys know that I teach a lot about stress and intonation, and I realize that the more I understand stress and intonation, the more questions I have and the more things I need to understand about it as well. So you kind of can always find more nuance and go deeper into things. So that's a really good way to take advantage of your time. So you've been, reviewing your studies. That's great. Always review. Review helps you remember things because we can't keep everything at the front of our minds at all times. Okay. Kat says, I'm reading and writing since I'm a PhD student. Well, yeah. So I remember when I was in grad school, one of the jokes was that, you never were expected to actually read everything that you were assigned. Like part of being a grad student is identifying what actually needs to be read and what doesn't. So now it's like you have more time. So are they going to expect you to read everything, right? Walking, running by Lake Michigan and doing yoga at home. So I can't go to my studio. Yay, another yogi. I actually do yoga every day. So this is a good opportunity to keep stretching. Again, I said it's snowing outside, so I haven't been outside, but I hope to go for some solo walks at some point in the future. So that's really cool. Okay, so Dimmy Kim says, where did it go? I think English speaking and singing is quite similar, so I'm also spending my time on singing practice. Yes, they're so similar for rhythm, intonation, and low placement, I think. Yes, definitely having control of where your voice comes from as a singer will help you sound better. And in fact, a lot of the really well-known people on YouTube who are teaching, accent pretty much are actually... Some of them are trained singers, and that's actually their background. And that shows you that you can learn in different disciplines and apply that. And so that's really awesome. Yeah. So the more you can spend understanding your voice and how you use your voice, that will help you command your voice when you're speaking with people here as well, or speaking with people in real life rather than singing to them, right? Yeah, they're similar for rhythm, intonation, and low placement, right? Yeah, it's one of those things. That's where, you bring up a really good point about the voice, because, I've been talking about the voice a lot lately, but your opportunity with your voice is, I think the more you can have fun with it and explore it and not feel stressed out about the fact that maybe you don't feel like you're a good singer, or you've been shy about using your voice, or people made fun of how you sounded or something like that. If you can find ways to enjoy exploring and experimenting with your voice, it's going to be easier to get the results you want in accent. Like accents practice, stress and intonation is all really silly. You feel really exaggerated. Even when I listen to myself speaking more naturally in a video like this versus recorded videos, I hear differences in how I use my voice. I also notice, perhaps when I'm recording a video with an exercise, I'm much more exaggerated and over the top than I probably would be in normal life. So, you have to experiment. You have to have fun with it. You have to try to enjoy your voice, realize that this is an instrument, a tool for you, that it's a really magical thing if you really think about it. And actually, I read a research summary the other day where they said that everybody it perceives their own voice as having a better accent than other people around them. So we automatically judge other people more harshly than we judge ourselves. And they even like changed the way people's voices were. And the people could still pick out their own voice and said, well, that person has a great accent. So we're tuned into our own voices. And so the more we can tune in and understand our voices, the better it will be. Actually, I have a video about that coming sometime in the next couple of months. So that'll be cool as well. So thank you for inspiring that little idea. Okay. And so Kat said, I decided to start working more systematically on my accent and expression in English. Yeah. The thing is, I have to admit to you guys while I'm, chatting and we're checking in, I have to admit that I initially resisted drills and practice exercises as a teaching technique. I found it kind of old school, and I liked people being more spontaneous. But when it comes to accent, you kind of need a system. You need to be organized. You need to be thoughtful about it, and you need to review and go back. So I've, incorporated practice exercises, drills into all of my programs because you need to consistently practice until it starts to feel natural. And then, hopefully the practice becomes a little easier. So that's another wise observation. Okay, and trying to improve my American accent while living in the UK. Woo, that's a challenge, right? Yeah, and it's funny. A lot of times people will ask me, well, what's the difference between the British accent? I'm like, I don't speak British English. I don't really have that much exposure to it. I just have a couple of friends who are British. So, yeah, it's kind of, that's a challenge. I admire but I've met people who are able to switch between the two. So maybe you'll be able to do that at some point. And Kat says, teaching online, since that's been my job here anyhow so far. I would love to hear, those of you who aren't used to teaching online, how this experience has been for you while we're going through this interesting time in the world. Edmund from Hong Kong. Hi, Edmund. I have your question for later. We can go out, but nearly all people here wear surgical masks. That's uncomfortable for breathing, so I've been spending more time at home. Wow. Yeah. I've seen pictures from different parts of the world where people are out and about wearing surgical masks. I used to live in New York City many years ago, so obviously I'm following what's going on in New York right now. And it's just really interesting, seeing people walking down the streets of New York with surgical masks, because it's not something I experienced. But, you got to take precautions whenever you can. Here in the US, we have a shortage of surgical masks. So I actually haven't been out in a while now. And so I haven't seen people out and about. I don't live in the city right now. So, I'd have to try to find people, which is, for the best for me right now. But yeah, sometimes it's just better to stay at home. We have so many options now, getting food delivered, but we also want to take care of those people who are supporting us in this time. Hi, Eliezer. What's the difference? Okay, I'll come back to the questions that are specific later. Red Army. Wow, it is. I remember you. Yes, thank you. Long time no see. Yes, I hope you're keeping yourself safe as well. I remember you. Hi, Semel from Turkey. Which British accent do I find? Okay, so I will come back to these, but I just said, I don't speak British English, so I can't really tell the difference between British accents. I can talk to you about American accents. Yeah. Yes. Reviewing yourselves. Oh my goodness. Yes. I rewatching something, as somebody who makes YouTube videos, one of the videos I've recorded this year that I haven't shared yet, I talk about how I've listened to myself so many times, watching the videos, editing the videos, fixing the videos, whatever, making sure everything looks right on the videos. And so you kind of get used to hearing yourself, but sometimes you're like, oh my God, why do I do that? Hi, Rasmus. Nice to see you. Raising awareness regarding stress. Yes, I remember. I think we talked about this last year. I remember you because you had some really good questions last year. But yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. And what reliable sites for video chat do you recommend to improve my English communication? I can say right now that I have no idea, because I really am not active on social media. I just use YouTube, my website, email. I'm not active on social media or video chat or anything like that. So I would seek out, looking on YouTube for your favorite YouTubers. They're often doing live chats, and that's happening a lot on Instagram as well. So, But I don't know about video chat options to talk with other people. Or if you're more specific later, I might be able to help. Okay, Kat says, there are moments I hear my voice more when I'm talking in a public context in the US, even at the grocery store. Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. When you're talking, sometimes you become hyper aware of yourself and how you sound. If you feel self-conscious or you feel like your voice is standing out more than other people. For me, it used to happen when I was traveling or living in South America and I was on buses. I always felt like people could hear, you're in an enclosed space and I'm like, oh my gosh, people are looking at me when I'm talking. So we become hyper aware of ourselves and noticing how we sound different. So that's really interesting. But there are some days that this flows more naturally and I don't pay so much attention to it. I think there's a psychological process as well. Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. So I used to say that there are just some days, this happens, as in your second language, but I think it also happens in your first language. There are some days that I can't speak English very well and I'm stumbling over my own words, and it's kind of a joke because I talk about communication, it's kind of my job. So I think that, there is a psychological process, and it has to do with how we feel, if we're tired, if we're well rested, how often we've been using the language, how often we've been interacting with other human beings, right? There's a lot that goes into it. So we can definitely return to that. Yeah. And sometimes we feel annoyed when we hear our voice. Yeah. And the other thing they say is because we hear our voices from inside our head, that when we hear recordings, we often, that's not how we sound, is it? We reject it more than other people would because we hear ourselves differently and we sound more resonant, more rich inside our bodies. I don't like the British accent at all. I don't have any problems with the British accent, but I don't speak it. I don't know what this is about, so we'll remove that unnice thing. Okay, so how are you? I am good. And yes, is Kim my name? Yes, my full name is Kimberly, and but nobody calls me Kimberly. I often joke that Kimberly is my formal name. If you don't know me, you'll call me Kimberly, but my name is Kim. Yeah, we did not talk about this. We did talk about this. I tried to pay attention more, than nothing really changed. It's super strange as I listen to a lot of English. Yeah, well, hopefully as I answer some of the questions you guys have submitted to me, and we can come back to that. So I will definitely keep that in mind. Okay, guys. So as you are going around, let's see. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go back to my slides, and I asked you guys if you felt like submitting questions before this Q&A that you could go ahead and do so, and then that way I had some chance to think about it, because some of these questions are actually really good, but they required some thinking. So I'm going to start with the questions people asked me in advance, and then I'll answer the questions in the chat to the best of my ability. Remember, some of these things require more thought, more development, more information. So don't be surprised if I say I have to talk about that later, or I'll make a video on that. And just remember that if I do say I'm going to make a video on it, it probably will happen. It just may take a few months, sometimes a year, sometimes more. I have one video that somebody requested 2 years ago that I just recently recorded. So it's just how it goes, because it takes time to do some research to come up with the right way to talk about something. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So you're welcome if you're coming in now and you want to answer these questions. Again, I asked you guys, what have you been up to? What have you been up to recently in the last few days, last few weeks? And what are you spending more time on now, given the situation that we're finding ourselves in? Okay, so, I guess I asked this question but didn't show it to you. What are you currently working on? So right now I am currently working on my courses. I'm updating them. I just updated one of my older courses, and I'm actually probably going to make another course while I have this time. So I'd love to hear what you guys are working on as well. Okay, so now it is time to move on to your questions. So these are the questions that people submitted in advance, and I'm going to do my best to answer them here live. And of course, it is very possible that these questions need more explanation, because sometimes it's hard to come up with things off the cuff, as we say, but sometimes it's more fun. That's why I decided to do it this way. Okay, so the first question that I have from Abdraman from Algeria was, what's the difference between melody, rhythm, intonation, and pitch? This is an excellent question, and it's something that I feel like I have a better understanding of now, rather than, I don't know. I feel like I have a better way of explaining it now. I understand it, but we don't often talk about these differences. So let's get into it. So first, let's start off with pitch. Pitch is the highness or the lowness of your voice, or the frequency of the vocal cords vibrating, your vocal apparatus. So the pitch is when you hear me go, wow, I'm going up high in pitch. And when it's low, I'm going lower in pitch. So it's a part of the way we produce sound with our voice that we use to communicate meaning in English, in American English, and all the other types of English as well. And intonation is how we communicate meaning through rises and falls in pitch. I would say that intonation, even though we're mostly talking about pitch here, there's also other types of prosody that can kind of play into intonation. But intonation, how we communicate meaning through rises and falls in pitch. So we're talking about the rise and falls from the stressed syllables of words. And we're also talking about rises and falls throughout your speech. So pitch is something that you kind of hear what's going up and down. Intonation is the meaning we can get from it. But it's important to understand, which I'll talk about in a moment, but intonation has functions in language, like grammatical functions, as well as emotional functions. So we use it in a couple of different ways, and that kind of meaning is interpreted differently based on the situation. Now, something he didn't ask was about stress. Now, stress is how we emphasize the key syllables of words, phrases, thought groups, and entire sentences. And it's important to understand that people will be talking about different levels of stress, because every word has a syllable that is stressed, that receives the most emphasis, that's the longest, the loudest, and highest in pitch in that particular word. But we also will stress one word of a phrase more than others, or one word of a thought group more than others, or one word of the entire sentence more than the others. And this stress is part of meaning, and it works together with intonation, which is why a lot of people often call stress intonation, which I will answer questions about in just a moment. I answered this question already. So stress is we stress syllables by making them longer, louder, and higher in pitch with a clear vowel sound. It's important to understand that at the word level, stress is part of pronunciation. If you want to correctly pronounce a word, you need to stress the right syllable by making it longer, louder, and higher in pitch with a clear vowel sound. Now, melody. When we're talking about stress in terms of an entire sentence or sentences in thought groups, it creates a musical pattern, because when we rise to a stressed syllable and fall afterwards, we're creating a rise and fall in pitch. And when people most of the time when we talk about melody, we're actually talking about music, but people feel comfortable with the word melody rather than intonation, which sounds kind of formal, or stress, which sounds very stressful. So melody is the musical pattern in speech that's produced by rises and falls in pitch due to stressed syllables and intonation patterns. So when the words in a sentence are stressed, there's going to be a rise and fall in pitch, which is going to give you a melody. And then we're also going to rise to a higher pitch at the end of a thought group, which is going to give you another type of the melody. It's going to add to the melody. And then we also rise at the end of questions and statements. And we also may express emotions by rising more or falling more within the sentence or the statement or several sentences. So this musical pattern that you hear is produced by the rises and falls in pitch. So if we're talking about these stressed syllables, it's the rises and falls in pitch that give English its natural melody. On the other hand, rhythm is the beats created by the contrast between lengthened stressed syllables and shorter, unstressed or reduced ones. Rhythm is what a lot of non-native speakers struggle with when they're working on their accent, because many languages are different than English and they are syllable timed, which means each syllable is the same length, more or less, right? It's about one beat at a time. And I know this from speaking Spanish and Portuguese. These are syllable timed languages. They are even in length. And so if you are pronouncing every single syllable in English, it's not going to give you English rhythm, as you can hear from how I said it there. So what I've been really focusing on my channel in the last year is creating contrast between these lengthened stress syllables and the shorter, unstressed or reduced ones. It's the contrast that will give you that natural rhythm. So it's kind of like, if you clap your hands, right? Beat, beat. It's rhythmical. It has a rhythm, but it's not. It's a different beat where it's between lengthened stressed syllables and shorter ones. So it's really the length of the stressed syllable that's giving you that rhythm, because you're hearing that exaggeration and then that pullback. So in order to answer these questions in more depth, I already have these 3 videos where I try to answer these questions in different words because it's, there's different ways to explain it, different ways to understand it. So a recent video I shared has this thumbnail, which is explore your pitch, but I think it's how to use pitch in American English. And then the one that says intonation matters starts with the difference between stress and intonation. And then I talk about why intonation is so important. And then in the video at the bottom where it says intonation and tone of voice, I talk about why intonation is so important, and I break down the different types of intonation. So let me check back in with the chat here and see what's going on. Okay. Since I'm a little ahead of you guys, let's see here. Let's see. Okay. I'll come back to these questions in just a moment. Okay, so let's go back to the slides, and I'll answer other people's questions. And I tend to give thorough answers to what you guys are asking because that's the point of a live Q&A. Okay, so the next question that I got was from Edmund, which is, I'd like to confirm if I understand the difference between sentence stress and intonation correctly. Sentence stress is about picking content words to emphasize by making them longer, louder, longer, and varied, rises and falls in pitch, relative to other function words in the sentence. Intonation is the way of varying the pitch, such as a rise and a fall. Is that correct? So this is Edmund's question from Hong Kong. So I'm going to come back and face you guys here. Okay, so this is basically a follow-up question to the one I just answered. So you basically have it right, that sentence stress is really, we normally stress content words and we reduce function words. And so you're going to have a rise and fall in pitch. And I talk about in my video on how to use your pitch. It's kind of like a wave, because it's not just like you hit the pitch up and down, up and down. That can make you sound robotic. It's like a gentle rise and then a fall, and a rise and then a fall, and then a rise and then a fall. So sentence stress creates that melody from the rises and fall in pitch, and the rhythm from the lengthened and shortened syllables. And that's what sentence stress is. Sentence stress plays a role in intonation because sentence stress expects you to stress content words, reduce function words, and create that contrast. Intonation basically is any additional meaning you add to that normal sentence pattern using your voice. So if you are stressing one word that would normally not be stressed or wouldn't receive the most stress, that's going to create that obvious difference that somebody's going to say, oh, wow, somebody's stressing that word because they're trying to make a point, or they're responding to a question, or they're clarifying, or they are providing emphasis to draw my attention to this other word. So that's basically emphasizing one word more than another in a sentence. And then intonation, like I mentioned, there's the different levels of intonation with grammatical intonation, which is when we are saying statements, information questions and statements, we have a fall at the end. When we're asking yes/no questions, we have a rise. And we also use these types of rises and falls in order to package information into thought groups so that people can follow what we're saying. And so you'll hear that rise and fall as people are trying to help you follow what they're saying, and then they're done and they're finished speaking. So intonation includes that, but intonation can also communicate your emotions, your attitudes, your feelings, your mood. It can also communicate levels of respect, ways that you're showing with your voice that you're not trying to sound too authoritative, or it can communicate that you're very stern and confident in what you're saying, and there's a lot of falls to show that authority. So intonation includes all of those different uses of pitch, and that's why it can be confusing, because for most people, you just need to start with making sure you end statements with a fall in pitch, and you rise on yes/no questions, and you end information questions a fall in pitch. You have to start somewhere. Then you can start introducing thought groups and rising through your pitch to signal you're not done, and then falling at the end. So there's a lot of different levels to intonation, which is why I could talk about it for a very long time. Okay. Let's see here. So let's go back to the questions that have already been asked. Okay. So let me know if that answered your question, Edmund, because I know that you're here right now. Okay. So Susan asked, what's prosody? So that's a great question. And so prosody is the elements of speech that affect meaning besides the consonant and vowel sounds. And this is important to understand that we express meaning by using words, but prosody is the additional meaning we add to the words through different things like stress and intonation. So prosody can include pitch, right? Changes in pitch, the way that we use pitch to emphasize a syllable. It can include stress, the way we make a stress syllable longer, louder than high and higher in pitch, the way we stress one word more than the others. It can also include intonation, right? The way that what I just mentioned about all the different types of intonation. It can include rhythm, such as, we have a regular rhythm of stressing words and then reducing them, but you could also kind of reduce a lot of words and then really emphasize one word or something like that, or really emphasize every single word for effect. Similarly, it can include your pace or your speed, where you rush through something and then really hold something else. So the way we create contrasts and differences in your pace or your speaking speed can also give meaning, as well as loudness. I mean, the most obvious one for a lot of people is when you're excited, you get really loud, and when you're feeling sad, you usually get really quiet, that kind of thing. So she went on to ask, does learning word and sentence stress give me that American tone while speaking? And otherwise, how can I acquire it? So this is another excellent question. So thank you, Susan. So I would say that learning word and sentence stress and starting to use it when speaking is really important to speak more clearly and be more easily understood by native speakers, because you're communicating meaning, you're signaling the words that are most important, and you're making it easy for people to follow what you're saying. It will give you a more American sound because we do use a lot of pitch. However, what I've been learning as I've been working one-on-one with people recently is a lot of people speak within two main pitch levels. So they're just going up and down, up and down, up and down. To sound more American, we have a greater pitch range. And those of you who live in the UK could probably say that we probably use a little more pitch variation. We kind of are more exaggerated than Brits. Of course, it's a total generalization. So you're going to have to let me know if that makes sense to you. But because it really depends on the person. You'll meet Americans with a smaller, somebody asked me a question about Brad Pitt, and I listened to him and I was like, wow, he really has a narrower pitch range, but you can still hear the differences in his pitch. He speaks lower, but but then you'll hear other people who have a wider pitch range. It just depends on your speaking voice. And that's actually an important thing to mention that I think I was going to mention later. But when we talk about pitch, intonation, being able to use your voice, it has to do with how the pitch changes relative to your own voice. You don't need to sound like me to have pitch in your voice, to use intonation patterns, to stress syllables. You need to have a difference between your pitch. And that's why I have all those pitch exploration exercises on my channel. So I encourage you to check those out. I think going to the more recent video on how to use pitch in American English, you can just practice them all there. And then there's also the video on voice exercises where you can explore that. But it's all about your voice, what you're able to do with your voice. So anyway, to sound more American, I think you have to start using different intonation patterns, knowing when to feel excited, that kind of thing. But you also want to use thought groups where you're kind of rising to your highest pitch on each of these thought groups and then falling at the end. And to start with that, check out my other recent video, which is on don't speak fast English, speak clear English instead. And then I also have one on breathing, pausing, and thought groups. And so those videos will help you kind of understand thought groups. But I do think the thing that people, when they want to sound more American, it requires a level of cultural sensitivity, right? I mean, some people are really good at imitating how other people sound, but you kind of realize, like, when would the person sound excited? When would they sound depressed? Is this the right way to ask a question? Am I sounding too aggressive in the way that I speak? So there's all kinds of different things that you can ask people, or listen to and how people use their voices. And actually, that's what I want to point out is in my video on how to use your listening skills to improve your accent, you're going to find all the ways to kind of tune your ear to those different aspects of speech. So hopefully that helps you. There's a lot I could say about this, so definitely leave a comment and let me know if that answered your question, because otherwise I could spend hours on that one question. Okay, the next, and so this is actually something that I kind of just answered, which is that when we're talking about sounding American, it's not just about word and sentence stress. We have word stress, which is at the word level, which we mentioned a moment ago. Sentence stress, which is which words are most important throughout the sentence. Then the contrast between those, that's what's going to help you sound more American, creating that contrast between the content words and the function words. A lot of times people rush to the end and they're trying to link words together and say gonna, wanna, coulda, shoulda, and things like that. But those things happen because of the contrast. And so you need the contrast throughout your speech in order for that to sound American. Like I said, we also want to think about thought groups and intonation, not just the grammatical uses of intonation, but the emotional and cultural uses. And that's important to understand that my intonation as someone who's in the millennial, kind of early millennial generation, is going to be different than someone who's older than me or someone who's much younger than me. So intonation gives you a lot of information about the other person. Okay, so Amanda asks, could you give us examples of varied intonation in speech, falling, rising versus rising, falling? So I wasn't 100% sure about what you were asking with this question, so I'm definitely going to, oh, thanks, Dimmy. I'll come back to that in a second. I wasn't 100% sure what you were asking with this question, so let's come back. So basically, I mentioned the intonation patterns, and you can check out my videos on falling intonation in American English, rising intonation in American English, and should your voice rise or fall for a comparison between them. But I think what you're asking is when would you kind of mix these intonation patterns? So if I'm wrong, please leave a comment and hopefully I can answer it in a future video. But basically, the thing to understand when we would mix those patterns, sometimes we do it to parcel or package information. So if you're asking someone, would you like coffee or tea? You're going to have a rise and then a fall in order to signal that you're asking them a question and you need their answer. Like, yes, coffee or tea, which one? And so sometimes you'll mix patterns in order to communicate information. The same thing with thought groups. We do a slight rise, not a whole full rise, a slight rise, a slight rise, a slight rise, and a fall to signal not done talking, not done talking, not done talking, done talking. So that's something else you can do or that you can notice. However, when we're communicating different types of emotions and attitudes, we might use different intonation patterns together. For example, if you're trying to sound condescending and you think the person's really stupid, you might use a lot of rises in your speech, and you're not actually using rises to signal you're not done. You're using high rises in a mocking tone of voice in order to signal that you don't think the person's following. And then when you're done talking, you might still fall at the end. So I don't know if that's what you're trying to ask. And the same thing with rises throughout your speech. Like if I'm really excited, I might go up and down and pitch throughout my speech, but I'll still fall at the end to signal that I'm done. Maybe, or maybe I'll keep rising with that kind of thing. So we might express different emotions by mixing and matching these intonation patterns. And that's why you always have to take intonation in context as opposed to the rest of the sentence or answering, sorry, I keep seeing the chat fly by, so I got distracted. You have to take intonation in context, the rest of the sentence and the rest of the idea. And that's why it can be really helpful to strengthen your listening skills and analyze people's voices. And that's what I tell you how to do in my video on how to use your listening skills to reduce your accent, which was another live video. So you can see a live video from like 2 years ago, I think. Okay. So I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know. Okay, so that was Amanda's question. Now let's move on to Christina's question. So what are some casual, informal ways to agree and disagree and give opinions? So Christina, I mentioned when you asked me this question before, I'm going to make a video on this because it's really hard for me to answer this in a brief way. But because I do love talking about conversation skills, I am going to, let me go back to the slides. I'm going to give you a couple of tips here. So when we're talking about agreeing, what I want you to understand is just like anything, there is a spectrum, right? So we don't just simply agree with someone. We may strongly agree. And we say something like, I thoroughly agree. I completely agree. I absolutely agree. I totally agree. And you'll use maybe an adverb with the word in order to emphasize what you're saying. And you can hear when I'm saying this, I'm stressing the adverb more because I'm trying to make a point of how strong I feel. With moderate agreement, it's just like, I agree, me too, that kind of thing. That makes sense, So I say that all the time. That makes sense. You were looking for casual expressions. Tentative agreement is like, I'm not really agreeing, and I'm going to say, I guess so. And as you can hear, I'm using a different type of intonation there. I'm not saying, I guess so. Where yeah, okay, I guess so. I'm saying, I guess so. I'm using this kind of wavy, tentative intonation to signal I don't 100% agree. Another really important thing you can do when you're trying to agree with somebody is to restate their idea in your own words. One of the most, let me come back to seeing you guys. One of the most important things that people need to work on in order to improve their communication skills in English is being able to rephrase your ideas and other people's ideas in your own words. That helps people feel heard. It helps you express yourself if maybe they didn't understand you. I think my last video I talked about that. So being able to restate the other person's idea in your own words shows that you agree. So you don't actually need an expression as long as you're reflecting what you heard back to them. It's a really, really good skill to have. So that's about agreeing. And then we have disagreeing. So a strong disagreement would be, I completely disagree. Fully wouldn't work, but I completely disagree. I 100% disagree. Something really strong to make your point. You might mildly disagree. I don't feel that way, right? You're not trying to start a fight with the person about not agreeing, but you could say, I don't feel that way. Or you might partially disagree and say something like, I see what you mean, but, and then you provide your own opinion, because sometimes we don't fully disagree with the person. We just somewhat disagree with them. So just a moment, I'm going to take a sip of my tea. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question for now. Put the rest on hold until later. Okay, so giving opinions. So here are just, this is another example of something I really want to point out to you guys, is that sometimes we feel like we have to say things in this perfect, unique expression, but actually we say a lot of I think, I believe, I feel that. We just give our opinions followed by the fact that we think it. And you may have learned in writing that this isn't a strong way to state your opinion, and that is true. There's better ways to, if you're writing, you have more time to think about what to say. But when you're speaking, we say, I think, I believe, I feel that that's not, you will use these expressions. Or you may just say, in my opinion, right? And then you'll give your opinion. You can hear that little rise at the end that signals I'm not done talking, in my opinion. Or if you're speaking from your own experience, in your own perspective, you could say, in my experience, as far as I'm concerned, shows that that's your opinion, not somebody else's, as far as I'm concerned. Or if you want to really say that your thought on the idea, it would say, I'd say that. So I hope that answers those questions for now, just to give you a few things to work with. There are many, many, many expressions we use, but the good thing to do is to just kind of find the ones that feel comfortable for you and use them. Okay. Oops. Okay. So I'm done with the pre-planned questions. I'll talk about that in a moment. So now let's go look at all of these cool chats here. All right. So I'm going to scroll through these questions because there's a lot, and I can't answer, try to put aside, you've given a lot of great questions, but try to give me your most important question. If you're still here, which one would you really like me to answer the most? Okay. Because there's a lot of questions here. So I'm going to go to your question here. Well, I'll start at the beginning, but I'm going to have to answer these questions quickly. Okay. So going back to these questions is, which one's correct? None of us is or are. Well, none is singular, but us is plural. So it depends on you. In American English, it depends on you, but none of us is excited about the results. None of us are excited about the results. They both work. Can we use you'd better to talk about the past? You'd better is a caution, like you'd better finish that project on time. And so, no, it's not what that's for. Is it rude to say hey when you're not so close to them? It can be. Something I see a lot on YouTube is people say, hey, bro. And if you don't know somebody, it's assuming a level of familiarity that you don't have. I sometimes get hey bro and I'm a woman, so that can be really rude. So no, but usually people just say, hey, how are you? Hi, but if you don't know somebody, I don't know when you would say hey. If you're trying to get somebody's attention, we usually use the word hey to get someone's attention. Okay, which one is correct? The news has spread. News is a singular collective noun. What's the difference between something's practical and functional? That's a vocabulary question. I would go to my video on the video on context, connotation, and nuance, and I would suggest you research that in the dictionary yourself to kind of understand the differences. I give the whole explanation of how to do that on your own. Most common response when someone said, "How are you?" Good, which is not very interesting, but it is the most common ones. Okay, let's see. We talked about these already. Okay. If I missed any of your questions, just ask me again. What's the difference between if you tell me I might be able to fix it, if you told me I might be able to fix it? Present and past. Which British English do you think's the most attractive? One that doesn't sound snobby. What do you think Cockney and RP? RP accent isn't what normal people sound like. So Cockney, I'm not that familiar with it. I just know it's a regional accent. Okay. Question. Okay. I find it extremely hard to notice where the stress is in a word. What would you suggest to raise awareness regarding stress? Listening only. Stop watching videos and start listening. Like, stop watching the visual on the screen and just start listening, just tuning your ear, just by trying to really listen. It might help you to visualize by, exporting an audio file, say a podcast, and opening up a program like Audacity, which is free, and watching the way the pitch rises and falls, because you can kind of see it sometimes if it's in a longer speech. Raise awareness of stress is sometimes imitating along with the person. Slowing down the video. A lot of times I have to speed up the video to hear pitch differences, but to hear stress, you might be able to sort of slow down the video and hear people go, wah. You'll hear that really lengthened syllable if you slow down the video. I'm going to have to think about that some more, but more awareness around stress. I mean, it's tuning. Have you seen my video on how to train your ear to hear English rhythm and melody? That one might help. And for applying stress is listening for patterns, listening for phrases and expressions that people use all the time and hearing which syllables stress the most. Like if you hear somebody say, "How are you?" Where are they stressing, right? How are you? How are you? You're going to pay attention to that. Notice when someone says, "How are you?" and when someone says, "How are you?" And if somebody says, "How are you?" why would they be changing that? So you have to kind of listen to people and analyze. And that's where it can be fun to listen to podcasts that are interviews and conversations, because those will give you a chance to listen to people interacting where you're not having the conversation. So a lot of podcasts, you can find long interviews and conversations between people and analyze what's going on in that dynamic. I'm sorry, I can't give a longer answer for that, but it's just tuning your ear, listening more carefully, and trying to imitate it, because sometimes it's like we spend too much time just doing the thing that we're not actually practicing it. Like we're like, oh, let me learn about it. Let me watch videos on it. But a lot of what you gain is from imitating other people. Like when I speak other languages, I learn it by hearing and repeating or experimenting with things. So it's not a stupid question or a weird question, but I just think that if you can't hear it, you might be hearing it from the kind of the lens of your native language. And so you kind of have to like forget about your native language and think about how does, and to be honest, that's my problem in Spanish. You have to forget your native language and think about how English works. My problem in Spanish is that I use stress the way it is in English. So I lengthen syllables, and that's not how stress works in Spanish. So it sounds off and it gives me an accent. So you have to kind of like teach yourself that you're speaking another language. And that's a lot. It takes a lot of focus. Actually, a video that I want to make on this topic is that if you're working on your accent, it may be hard to sound as fluent as you want, because when you're fluent, you're not thinking about what you're saying. But when you're working on your accent, you're thinking about what you're saying until it becomes second nature. So I hope that answers that question. I answered that question already. There's moments I hear my voice. Yeah, we talked about this. Yeah, definitely a psychological process. Okay. Yeah, Rasmus, I wish I had a better answer for you. Yeah, it's just experiment with different techniques. If what you're doing is not working, change things up, throw different things in, try, using things like a rubber band, get a musical instrument, little drums, or like a xylophone or something, and try using your body, dancing to it, like kind of clapping, remembering dance rhythms. There's lots of ways to get other parts of your body, your mind involved to think about it differently. I am not on Facebook. I really don't like Facebook. I mean, I do have a Facebook page for English with Kim, but I don't really use it. How can I speak fast like you? Practice. I think really mastering stress will help you, because a lot of what people hear is stress is actually, or here is us speaking fast is actually stress, that we're emphasizing key syllables, then rushing through the ones that don't matter, emphasizing key syllables and rushing through the ones that don't matter. Usually Americans speak way louder than Brits. That is often true. I learned to speak English the American way, but never mastered it. Now I'm living in London, can't speak the locals, nor improve the American accent since I have no one to speak with me. Yeah, that's a big problem for people. It's I had that experience speaking Spanish, is that I learned the Argentine accent and I kind of sounded more like Argentines, but I still sounded American. And then I sounded really silly speaking Spanish with people from, say, Mexico when I lived in San Diego. It sounded weird to have an Argentine accent. So it's like a lot of times we get this hybrid accent, and that's okay. It's fine, because as long as you're trying to speak clearly and be more easily understood, that's what matters. Some people have stronger feelings about learning accents than others, but this is a global world. We all speak with an accent from somewhere, even native speakers. So yeah, I hear you. What to do? It's really hard that you're living, because, I was speaking with a non-native speaker who lives here last week or the week before, and she said that the reason that she's able to have such an American sounding accent is because she lives here. She's immersed in the culture all the time, watching the news, listening to TV programs, movies, interacting with people at the coffee shop, at the stores, obviously not so much right now. So there is an element of immersion. So if you want to sound like an American and you live in London, you may need to immerse yourself in American English every time you're not out and about living your life. Or you can kind of challenge yourself to understand the differences between the two, and you might be able to switch between them. But it really is hard. But remember, when it comes to stress and intonation patterns can vary regionally, but the stress patterns are often the same. There might be slight different vowel pronunciation, or they might articulate their consonants differently than we do, but the stress patterns are often the same. Not always, because I have a video on that, 30 words that Americans and Brits stress differently. So it's helpful to know which those are, so you can switch that on and off. I hope that helped. I can understand the stress words, but have a hard time understanding unstressed words. Yeah, that's definitely a problem, or a challenge. A lot of times you have to remember that the stress words are the ones that matter and the unstressed words aren't as important. So that's what I always say. If you listen for the stress words, you're still going to get the general meaning, even if you miss some of the unstressed words. But I think once you get more used to the rhythm, the rise and fall in pitch, you start to you're able to predict what's the words that are being reduced, because you fill in the blanks from your own knowledge and understanding. Okay, the length and stress levels of Spanish versus English. Exactly. Okay, answered that one. Okay, whoa. Okay, good. Okay, so I answered your questions. Thank you. Okay. When you have read a book or sub-vocalizing, do you have this? No. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's a really good question, Demi. So when you read a book or sub-vocalizing, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by sub-vocalizing, but no. And actually, so I mentioned I'm updating one of my courses, and I have examples of thought groups. And in one of the videos, I'm like, oh my gosh, I sound like I'm reading out loud. Because actually, let me come back to the main screen, because this is such a good point. So basically, when we're talking about fluency, like language fluency skills at a language level, you talk about, obviously most people think of speaking fluency, and you think about writing fluently, but you also can read fluently and listen fluently, right? A lot of times those happen first. But something else that I've seen people mention is reading out loud fluently. When you read out loud, you're speaking differently than you do normally. And that's where, there's a difference between, even when I pre-record a video or I'm teaching live into the camera right now, I'm going to sound different because I am thinking as I'm going here, but where I'm trying to think about what I'm saying and recording it, or maybe I've scripted it a little bit, I'm going to sound different. But when I'm trying to, record video lessons, sometimes I will hear myself and I'm like, oh my gosh, I sound rehearsed. I sound like I'm not stressing the words like I would normally. So a lot of times when I pre-record things or I record exercises, I have to really say it quite a few times in order to say it the way I would actually say it in speech. And sometimes I'm more successful than others. So it is totally a different thing, 100%. When you read a book, let me go back to that question actually, though. Okay. So do you have the same rhythm, intonation, and pitch in mind? Should you be using the same rhythm, intonation, and pitch? Yes, but it's a skill to be able to do it and to sound as natural as you do speaking. And that's why if you listen to an audiobook, they might not sound the way that, especially if the audiobook's read by the author and they're not a professional voiceover artist, they're going to sound different than someone who is a professional and they can do voices and show you different emotions through how they speak. But it is the same rhythm, intonation, and pitch. It should be. But you can tell when someone's reading out loud versus talking naturally, not just because they're making mistakes or using thinking words. So I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know. What's my take on vocal fry? Should you imitate that too? Vocal fry is natural. I fry at the end of my speeches, especially, or at the end of when I'm speaking, especially when I am recording videos. Sometimes I have to re-record things several times to try to fry my voice less. And it has to do with where we're starting from in our pitch and how much space we have to go down at the end, right? And sometimes you have to really open up the lower end of your voice, and we just don't all have that much control over it. And see, I just fried at the end of that one. The reason people do it is that we speak with a less dynamic pitch range than we used to in times past. So when people don't have enough there, or even if you start too high, it might really strain your voice to go low. Or if you start too low, you don't have anywhere to go. So you're going to fry at the end of your speech. That's what vocal fry sounds like. But it's not good for your vocal cords. Everyone does it. And a lot of times you hear people criticize women doing it. And that's because it's more obvious when women do it. But because we have higher pitch generally in a stereotype. So anyway, but men do it too. And so it's normal, but I wouldn't try to do it. Because if you're not doing it, that means you have a very rich, beautiful voice and you have more control over your voice. But it will happen for a lot of people at using falling intonation because you're going rise and then fall. And it's like hard to hit the fall. I have to really act weird to get myself to do it without not frying. Oh, thank you, Desiderio. I mispronounced that. Desiderio. Okay, I've seen some of your videos and I find them very helpful while prepared. Thank you. My question is how to be able to distinguish the stress pattern in sentences like these ones. We live near the greenhouse and we live near the greenhouse. Girlfriend. A lot of that actually has to do, well, in that case, it has to do with a minimal pause. But okay, we live near the greenhouse. House would be stressed more because house is a noun and nouns generally receive more stress. So we live near the greenhouse and then the rise and the fall. And that's where the sentence stress, like the most important stress will be on house. We live near the greenhouse. We live near the greenhouse. In that case, the word greenhouse is actually stressed on the first syllable, green. So we live near the greenhouse, and you're going to fall down from there. And then a lot of times with girlfriend and female friend, you actually want to just say female friend or male friend, if you're going to use it in the male version. Girlfriend is stressed on the first syllable because it's two words together there. So hopefully that helps. But it's a matter of practice. It's a matter of understanding the rhythm, knowing which word is the most important, what you're responding to. A lot of times these stress patterns are in response. Which house do we go to? You're going to go to the green house and you're going to pause because you're trying to really emphasize green. And it's going to be obvious that green is being held more than house. So a lot of it has to do with that micro pause between words. What's my take on upspeak? I actually, 2 years ago, I recorded a video on it, but I had a problem with the audio, so I never released that video. So I was going to talk about it, but it's just such a debate to talk about upspeak that I just didn't want to get involved because people get really negative. I think upspeak is normal. I don't think upspeak... I think a lot of times you have to consider why the person's using upspeak. There's some people who use upspeak, which is when you rise after every sentence because you're not sure. And you'd say, my name is Kim. Asking it like a question. I think that leads to miscommunication. But a lot of times we use rises like simple, gentle rises. Like if you're not sure, I'm not sure what you're saying, or I don't want to offend you, but I was wondering if we could do this. You're doing that because you're trying to show the person that you're being tentative. The problem is it's become part of the culture where some people don't feel like they can sound confident and authoritative. So I just think you should try to sound confident, but also friendly. So that's where you get the pitch rises throughout your speech, but the confident falls at the end. I think that's my take on it. Okay. Yay, Saeed. I'm glad I answered that. Is it okay to be otherkin? I don't know what that means. You're going to have to let me know. Oh, thank you, Dimmy. I'm glad that worked for you. Okay. I love the little sticker. It's so cute. Let me know if you have any more questions, if you think about it later. Okay. Luis says, how do I know when a word should be pronounced with Z instead of S? For example, easy. It has to do with whether the sound before it is voiced. E is a vowel sound and it's voiced, which means you can feel the vocal cords, the voice box vibrating. E. So the S will sound like Z, easy. I have a video on this, how to pronounce the S, ES in apostrophe S, but it also works within words. Easy, right? So for that kind of use of S, that would follow the rules because you're moving from a voiced sound to another voice sound. Easy. Z, right? Easy. If it was a non-voiced sound like pat. No, that doesn't. No, that's when it's in a consonant cluster. I'm trying to think of an example with peace. No, that doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work for that. Forget what I just said. Peace, because peace is an S sound. I don't know. But I do know for the end of words, which is what I made the video on. I'd have to research that. So, but I can't answer it like off the top of my head because that doesn't work for peace because peace is not a Z sound. So it doesn't work. Peace. But peace. Huh. I have to think about that. I have to research that. Thanks for the question. Come back to me and ask later. What's the best way to work on your English melody? Ooh, so many ways. I think I answered that throughout this stream, but I would say, remember that you need to tune your ear as well as your mouth to be able to do that. So I think that will help you. And so I would suggest looking on my video on how to train your ear to hear English rhythm and melody. And then remember all the other practice where we talk about practicing by reading out loud, by learning stress patterns, repeating things, listening to where people are putting the emphasis and repeating after them. So, yeah, I have a lot to say. I have a lot more I can say about that, but there's no one best way. That's actually important to say. There's no one best way. It's whatever helps you. Right? It's anything that works for you is a good method. If it doesn't work for you, stop. It might just not be right time. You might need to, I just hit my microphone. You might need to work on something else first. So, hope that answers that. Got you. Check out my video on informal contractions. That will help you. Can I teach you how to use the rubber band technique, please? Yes. And actually I have a video coming up where I use the rubber band, but I would suggest you go to my video. It's a live stream I did few years ago, which was like practice word live accent training, practice word and sentence stress with me. I will link these videos in the description. But actually, and that's important to mention that a lot of the videos that will help you with these things aren't the ones that YouTube is going to show you, but they are on my channel. It's just not the popular videos. They're not the ones people are watching for whatever reason, but they're still good videos. Yes, okay, these questions have been answered. Okay, thanks for answering my question. So sentence stress is more about the expected way of emphasizing certain words, where intonation is more, yes, that's a good way of summarizing. Intonation is more personal, contextual to express emotion. Yes, you were almost 100% right. Yeah, live chat's a challenging English test. Yeah, and it's challenging for me to come up with the answers quickly. Yes, so sentence stress is about saying things the way they're expected to be said. That's a really smart way of explaining. Intonation is also about saying things the way things are expected to be said when we're talking about the grammatical uses of intonation and the ways we use it, thought groups, statements, and questions. Intonation can also include that personal. And the way I've heard it expressed is stress is the way things should sound, to kind of the way they should sound to sound the way English sounds, whereas intonation's the emotions and attitudes, but it also includes these grammatical uses. So when people say stress is intonation, the reason they say that is you need stress for intonation to sound natural. So I hope that helps you. Let's see. What is correct to say? I've always been treated bad, or I always. Moving always around depends on the context of the sentence. I mean, some people will tell you not to split the infinitive, and some people don't care, so I've always been, and I think treated badly. Grammar is not really my specialty, guys. It used to be, but now I just really talk about accent and communication skills. So I haven't taught grammar in like 4 or 5 years. It's been a long time. Okay. So I've always been treated bad, or have I always been treated bad? It really depends on which one you're emphasizing. A lot of times moving the emphasis around is what matters, but I'm sorry that trillion thanks, but I would say it's badly, right? I've been treated bad. I always get confused with that, even as a native speaker. Is it badly? I've been treated poorly I've been treated poorly by my, I've been treated poorly. I've always been treated poorly. I always have been treated poorly. I would probably say it in the first example. Okay. I need one sentence, complex sentences. I think you're asking a grammar question about like sentence diagramming. I'm not really sure. My speaking, the T is very strong. How to correct it? Practice holding the T inside your mouth. In my video on how to sound more American, I talk about how we don't constantly release the T sound. It's learning to tap the tongue on the roof of your mouth without actually releasing it all the time. So it just is a matter of practicing it and just trying to soften it when you don't need to overpronounce it. But some varieties of English do have a stronger T. American English, it's softened. Hello, Majid. Nice to see you. Thank you, Demi. I love the little graphic. I haven't done live streams in a while, so this is a new thing for me. Okay, I'm on my own with you, teacher. Thanks, Fetch. Thank you. I'm glad you're not wasting your time. I know it's a long live stream. I'm getting tired. I don't know why YouTube doesn't let me rewind your live video. I may not have clicked. I thought I clicked the DVR setting, but it will afterwards. So don't worry. Thank you for answering. Is fluency our goal, or should we aim at reaching a native speaker like accent? Let me take a sip of tea because a lot of talking. I would say it depends on you. I think speaking fluently, thinking fluently is important. And once you're doing that, it's important to work on your accent all the time. So it's not like you speak fluently and you have no idea of what goes into a natural accent. I'm going to stop showing the chat to answer this question. Okay. So the question is fluency our goal, or should we aim to reach a native speaker like accent? It depends on you, right? Your goal is your goal. And that's the thing that kind of drives me a little crazy about YouTube is everyone's telling you this you need to do to sound fluent. Here's the one tip to sound fluent. There's fluency. I actually want to make a video about this, there's different types of fluency. You're not just fluent and you're done, right? You're not fluent and you never need to work on your English again. Fluency is like the first step to a greater, deeper understanding of a language. You can speak a language fluency and be completely culturally insensitive. You can speak a language fluently and have a nearly impossible to understand accent. And so while you're working on, fluency is usually your earlier goal because you need to be able to think quickly and respond without hesitating and not be translating in order to speak the language fluently, right? That's a really important goal in order to sound like you have a certain mastery of the language. But if you're not paying attention to any of this accent stuff way back in the beginning, it's going to be really, really hard for you're going to have to go back and fix those mistakes. So if you're kind of just paying enough attention as you're working on your fluency to try to emphasize the key ideas, learn how to pronounce words closer to accurate by closer to accuracy by stressing the syllable. That's really going to help people understand you. That's about being understood. The accent goal is something that you're going to need to work on later on, or it's going to be a lifelong journey to improve your accent. I mean, even people who have a very nice, natural American sounding accent still have things they can fix and work on, or they can learn how to speak better in presentations or use their voice more effectively. I'm always learning how to use my voice more effectively just from teaching online and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't say that your accent is your primary goal. And I do think that if you're not already fluent, like maybe that's distracting you from something that's important, like fluency. I think accent stuff is important when you need to speak clearly and be easily understood, even if you're not necessarily fully fluent yet. But when we talk about fluency, it's a lifelong journey, because you can be fluent hanging out with your friends, but you sound not so confident or not so professional at work, right? So you need to work on professional fluency. Or you may, feel comfortable interacting, speaking English, but when you interact with native speakers, you may say things that are culturally insensitive. It's like when people ask questions like, can I say this to a native speaker? Like, for example, question I get all the time is like, when people say Ms. Kim or Miss Kim or something like that, Mrs. Kim. And in American culture, we don't use that type of address. We don't say teacher. We don't say any of these things. You just use my name. And so that's like cultural fluency. You can be fluent and still be calling someone Miss Kim, even though you should just call them Kim. Actually, I spoke to a native speaker on the phone, and she used a form of address with me that wasn't appropriate. So I'm like, here you are, like, that's not even the right way to talk to me, and you're a native speaker. So, it's sensitivity. It's understanding people, trying to see what's the best thing. What's the best way to communicate? You're always going to be improving your communication. Okay, hold on just 1 second. I need to have something to drink because I've been talking for so long. So just one moment. All right, I'm back. All right, so let's see what we were asking, the questions I was answering here. All right, so I hope that answered your question or gave you something to think about. Okay, how do we keep adding vocabulary to our vocabulary? How do we ensure we're pronouncing a new word correctly? Okay, my vocabulary videos are a good resource for that. I have a playlist, which I think is called How to Improve Your Vocabulary Naturally. And it was a series of 3-hour-long live streams that I did a few years ago, I think 3 years ago. That has all my best tips on vocabulary. But the way you keep adding vocabulary is keep learning, keep challenging yourself, listen to different things, bring in new information, keep reading. You just are constantly being exposed to it. You learn the vocabulary through that. How do we ensure we're pronouncing a new word correctly? The most important thing to do is to identify which syllable is stressed. So check out my video on word stress in American English to find out how you can look that up in a dictionary. And so the stress is really key first, and then you can kind of add the rest of the syllables back onto the stress syllable. I do want to make a video on that, like how to figure out how to pronounce a word you don't know. But actually my most recent video, which is if somebody asks you to repeat yourself, like what can you do? Like how can you repeat the word to try to pronounce it right? So the most recent video on my channel, besides this one, that one will help you kind of figure out how to troubleshoot the word if you're not sure you're pronouncing it correctly. But figure out which syllable is stressed, and then you're able to add in the rest of the syllables from there. And that's the way people teach when you're learning to read. You start with which is the most important syllable, and then you kind of build the word backwards from there. So, but identifying the stressed syllable using the clues that you can get in a dictionary, that's going to help you know if you're pronouncing it correct. And also just with the internet, you can listen to different people saying them on different dictionaries, on Google. And so I do that if I'm not sure how to pronounce a word. I listened to them, I hit the little listen symbol and just listen to it a few times until I can figure out the stress and that kind of thing. Okay. A non-native speaker learning IPA is very helpful in distinguishing Z, S, or other unvoiced voice consonants. Exactly. And it's funny, based on the way that I started teaching English and pronunciation, I didn't learn the IPA, but I've learned how to navigate it and use it to help people. And so you don't have to fully speak the IPA, which is the International Phonetic Alphabet. You don't have to speak it as a fluent language. You just want to be able to identify, where's the reduced syllables? Which vowel sounds are those? It's really helpful to know for the vowel sounds, especially. And sometimes it's just a good idea to just look the word up. Really, it is, now you can just Google it and it's right there with the pronunciation. Okay, my native language lacks the amount of intonation that English has, so I'm not able to add much intonation. Yeah, if you don't use pitch the way we do in English, it takes work to get comfortable with it, because otherwise it feels like you're faking it. It feels weird. So that's a pretty, reasonable question. Oops, clicked the wrong thing. It's me switching between screens on our screens on my computer. Okay. In stressing sentences, you can stress many words, but at different levels. Hi, Mary. Sorry, I missed that one. Yes. Yeah, there are different levels of stress and that's why, most people who teach stress for the, I would say like 65% of people, if you just stress the content words and reduce the function words, that's going to lead to clear communication. You're going to clearly communicate with other people. The other levels of stress are at the more advanced level of speech. And for people who have to speak more professionally and have to make sure their ideas are packaged well and presented well. So there are different levels of stress. I mean, linguists can determine even more levels, because not every content word is going to be stressed at the same level, because we don't stress two syllables next to each other at the same level. That creates what we call a stress clash. And when we speak, we avoid stress clashes. So that's why we might have a phrase like eat breakfast, and we're going to say, I'm going to eat breakfast. I'm not going to say I'm going to eat breakfast, right? Because those two next to each other, we wouldn't say. I would say eat breakfast. And that's where we use stress in phrases and stress in thought groups. And then also, some words in a thought group are more important than others. So you're going to stress one of those words more. And then in every sentence, you're going to have one word that's the most important. So you're going to stress that. So there are different levels of stress. But if you start with a solid foundation of sentence stress, it'll be so much easier. Okay, I'm going to start wrapping this up because getting tired. Do you think working on the accent of several languages simultaneously is possible and feasible? I think that's an individual issue. It depends on the person. It depends on their own skills. But I would say that it's not possible for me. It hasn't been possible. I'd never say never, right? But it wasn't possible for me to work on Spanish and Portuguese at the same time. So it was too hard. But some people are able to do it. There are people who are multilingual, who grow up multilingual. There are people who are polyglots who have learned many languages at the same time. But that's not something I personally can speak to. Someone I know who focuses on this is Lindsay of Lindsay Does Languages. I think her channel is now called Lindsay Williams. And so she's a good resource for polyglot information and that kind of thing. But I personally don't have the skills in that. And it's just too much for me. But that's not my specialty, polyglot, language skills. Okay, couldn't agree more. Yay. Trillion thanks. Okay. Oh, thank you. Huge love for you. I'm really grateful and thankful for your tips. How can I easily pronounce long words? Go back to what I just said about identifying that stress syllable. And I want to make a video on this now that we have two people who have mentioned it. But with reverse constructing the word, like if I'm going to say, here, I'm going to put this on the screen. Say I have a word like pronunciation, right? That I just typed here. Pronunciation is a longer word. If I identify the stress syllable, that's A, right? So it's pronunciation, right? So I can construct the word from that. I could say Asian, C-A-tion, nunciation, pronunciation. Right? So I'm reverse constructing the word from the stress syllable and then building it out. And the stress really gives you time. It gives your mouth time to kind of relax after that. So you're going to see this before you're going to hear me say this. So reverse constructing the word is going to help you with longer words if you're able to look it up. So words are not impossible to say as long as you know where they should be stressed. Most people struggle because they either skip the stress when it's on the first syllable or they feel like it should be later in the word. So, and that's where I teach stress patterns on in my course, because that will help you be able to identify what people are saying. So stress patterns will help you because you can master them so that you're not always trying to guess where the word is. So pronunciation, you have communication. You're going to stress that syllable. Communication. And anytime you learn a shun word, it's going to be that syllable before the shun. So it's going to help you master stress in longer words because you won't be guessing where should I stress the syllable. Okay. How much? Okay. So I hope that helps answers your question, Athir. How important is the accent for an interpreter in your opinion? I don't know that much about interpreting as a field. That's not something I've worked in, because I've been in education rather than in interpretation. But I would say that I think a lot of interpreters have accents because they're focused more on the content than the delivery. Because they're quickly processing both languages and communicating them. But I really don't know. I'm not something I know about. So, I think whether you have a nice accent or I do think as we become more global, accents are going to matter less. And I really think accents are only a big concern for people when they live in the country that they want to have the accent of, because they want to sound like their community. So, and actually I have a video that I'm going to be coming out with, might even be this week, maybe next week, which is on global English versus native English. And so I'll talk about that a little more. But accent, I feel with accent, it matters only if you think it does. Okay. Okay, let's see. I didn't know working on sentence stress and intonation would be so frustrating and stressful for me. What do you recommend me to do? It's frustrating and stressful if, a lot of times creating, actually, I think you've watched this video before, Mary, but I would say, focus on something for a short period of time, because, break down the goal into smaller little goals, because sometimes, so I have a video on how to find focus and improve your English more quickly. And it talks about how to make a 3-month plan, where you have a 3-month plan where you are kind of only focusing on one topic at a time. So anyway, when you're only focusing on one topic at a time, you're going to be able to then break it down into smaller steps. And so, if you're only working on sentence stress, if you're thinking sentence stress and intonation as a whole, that's overwhelming because there's a lot of different levels. But if you're only working on content words and function words for a while, once you feel like you have a better sense of that, then you can start introducing thought groups, and then you can start using intonation with thought groups. So you kind of have to break it down into smaller steps, because anytime we think of a big goal, it is easy to get overwhelmed. Okay, let's see. Just a moment here. All right, I'm back. Let's see. What's the best way to get yourself to reach American cultural fluency? That's a really big question. I would say, obviously, nothing beats living within the culture, studying the history of the culture, kind of being a cultural anthropologist and asking yourself questions about why do people do what they do? What's the difference between my culture and other cultures? Understanding the different elements that people emphasize within a culture. I would say I really do think listening to people, listening to vlogs, podcasts, people's conversations, you kind of learn how people actually are. I don't think TV shows are always the best way to learn about people because they're acting. But now with vlogs and podcasts, sometimes people are still acting in those, but I think they're being more natural. So I would just say, like, ask yourself questions, really ask yourself what's going on. Why are people doing what they're doing? Well, how do they feel about this? Like, what does this mean about the way they think? Why would they understand this? It's always interesting to think about people's education. Like, what values do they learn growing up? Instead of, a lot of times we judge other cultures other cultures harshly because they're different than ours. But when you start questioning things, you ask, okay, this is what my culture believes. Do I believe that? Does this culture believe that? How does this show up in the culture? I mean, it's asking yourself questions, being reflective, and then you start understanding what's going on. But cultural fluency, and actually in terms of speaking, speaking more, the thing that I always suggest is like listening to people, like how do they interact with each other? What questions are they using? How does their voice sound? Like, why would they be doing this? What's the dynamic that they have? And actually, I think I have this in one of my videos on how to use your listening skills to improve your communication skills. I think I talk about it there, if not somewhere else. But if I don't put the video below here, then leave a comment and I'll see if I can find it for you, because I know I mentioned it somewhere. Okay. All right. So see you all next time. Thank you. Okay. Hello. One tip on how to pronounce a certain word. Use Youglish. Yes. That's actually a really good pronunciation. You can just just keep clicking and hear people say it different ways. Yeah. Because we say it different ways depending on our accent. Some of the pronunciations I use of things are regional to New England, and other people might pronounce it slightly differently, or they'll pronounce it differently in the South. How to pronounce the P at the end of the word, pronounce it as the B sound. Put your hand, you should feel air on the P. B sound is your lips touching together, and you should feel a vibration. So P and B, there's a difference. So if you feel air at the end, that's P, P, P. Air should leave. If you feel no air, B, 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 that's the B sound. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, so I answered your question. Okay, last question. Do you agree with me that the big problem with learning English is pronunciation skills? No. No. I don't think that pronunciation skills here, I'm going to slide off that screen. Is pronunciation an important thing with learning English? It is. Sorry, I saw another thing come in. Let me click off because I get distracted by the chat going. Is pronunciation a problem? It's the problem with pronunciation in English. And actually, I was just rewatching one of my old videos on 3 reasons you're mispronouncing word. The challenge with pronunciation is if people don't use stress at all. The problem is we do not teach stress, like in early levels of English. They do not teach it at the beginner level. I don't think almost none of the programs I've worked in the past with beginners ever focused on that. And that's really key for pronunciation. So either you're not using stress, you're stressing the wrong syllable, or you're substituting sounds from your native language. That is only a problem if it creates a communication challenge, right? Because, a lot of times people get so caught up in the vowel sounds, but there's regional variation with which short vowels that we use on certain words. The long vowels are very important, which is why I do teach them in my video on how to sound more American. But pronunciation is not your only challenge. I think it's so much more important to work on being able to think in English, speak without hesitating, communicate your ideas, and then you can fill in those gaps with your pronunciation. But I don't think pronunciation is what's holding people back from communicating well in English. I think it's you need to be able to think more quickly in the language in order to be able to achieve your goals in it. And I think a lot of times, people aren't immersing themselves in the language they want to learn. And that definitely happened to me as a non-native Spanish speaker for many years. So I think it's really important to it's not just pronunciation. It's being able to use the language and interacting with it, and both listening, improving your, challenging yourself with your listening in order to improve your speaking. So I do think pronunciation is a challenge, but I don't think it's the biggest challenge. Okay. And then the last question that I have here was from Jason, which is, I noticed in general, women have more up and down, but not men. Is that a fair statement? I think it's more obvious when women have the rise and fall in pitch. And so I think a lot of times we hear women's voices as having more pitch variation because we have a higher normal speaking pitch in general, and obviously always in general. I do think that men have pitch variation in their voices. I just think that it starts slower, so it doesn't sound as high as my pitch perhaps would. I can pick it out in men. I do think what you're talking about here, why would women have more pitch than men, is that is socialization. Women are going to sound more tentative, more hesitant because of cultural influences on the way we communicate, whereas men are expected to sound more authoritative, more forceful. Obviously, huge generalization, but you want to think about how these cultural influences affect how we use our voices. And so, but I always try to listen to, there's an interview I often share, which is on Lewis Howe's podcast channel on YouTube, and he talks to a man named Bob Goff. And Bob has extremely obvious pitch variation. So I always try to share that with men who aren't sure that they actually hear it in men's voices. So, okay. So, okay. So I think that's it for today. All right. So thank you guys so much for joining me for this live stream. It ended up being a 90-minute live stream. I didn't expect that, but that's totally fine. In any case, it was so nice to catch up with you guys and hear that you are still staying focused on your goals, even despite what's going on these days. And thank you for your excellent questions. As you can see, it can be a little bit tiring to be able to talk about this at length for so long, but I hope you found it helpful. If you are watching live right now, be sure that you bookmark or save this video for later, because usually I leave the live streams up for about a week and then I unlist them, where you'll still be able to access them at this link, but they don't usually get a lot of views on my YouTube channel, so I don't want people to be scared by a 90-minute video, for example. So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me for this live stream. It was so nice to meet with you guys again. And if you have questions that you think of afterwards, I am happy to answer your questions later on in the chat, or I will potentially make other videos on them. There's a lot I could talk about, and that would be so great to be able to continue to get your questions. So I'm getting tired. It's time to go. So once again, I'm Kim from EnglishWithKim.com. I'm your guide to the essential communication skills you need to sound more natural in English. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up somewhere over here and share it with a friend. And of course, if you have questions that you'd like me to answer in future videos, leave them in the comments below, because that's where I get good ideas for my videos. Be sure, if you haven't already, check out some of the playlists that I have listed on my channel. I'm trying to organize things so that you can easily access this information. And don't be afraid to use that search bar on my channel in order to find answers to these questions. Sometimes the videos YouTube recommends to you are not always the videos that answer your questions, and I have them. They're just not being promoted. So you might have to do a little search to find the videos that answer the questions that you have. Oh, and the one thing I did want to mention is that I showed you guys here, in this time, if you would like to focus a little more on any of these things, please check out my free email courses. The one that will give you my best tips to help you sound more natural, speak more clearly, be more easily understood is the one I share the most, which is at soundmorenatural.com. It's a 5-day email course with my top tips that will help you sound more natural. And Stress Starter Kit will help you focus on different elements of word and sentence stress so that you can kind of get a better understanding of how to work on it. And it gives you some challenges to think about it. And then Intonation Challenge will help you understand your pitch and how to use your voice, use your intonation to express yourself in English. So those are 3 email courses that are available to you at this time. So, and yes, I actually want to put the old live streams on a playlist at some point. Yep. So that is great. Yes. Be sure to bookmark, as I mentioned a moment ago, be sure to bookmark or save this, watch later, just to make sure you can definitely access this. It'll also be in your history, but it'll be up for probably about a week, and then we'll see what happens. We'll see. So hopefully you guys stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel with that bell in order to get notified of when I do live streams next, because during this situation, it's a great way for us to connect. So thanks, you guys. See, I'm getting real tired. Thank you guys so much. And it was nice chatting with you. Have a good one. Goodbye.